Welcome to Sahara Reporters. We are with us this evening Mr. Samson Itodo of the YIAGA Africa. You've been on ground for a couple of days now. Can you tell us what have been your observations so far about preparation for this Ekiti 2022 election?
Well, so far so good. All the critical stakeholders involved in these elections are fully prepared for the election based on the engagements that YIAGA Africa has had and other civil society organizations have had. This week, INEC hosted a stakeholders meeting where the candidates, the party chairman, also civil society and security agencies were on ground. And based on our assessment, INEC has conducted about 12, as of today, let's say 13 out of the activities on the election timetable. And in our earlier statements and reports that YIAGA Africa released, where we did indicate that there some level of preparations on the part of INEC. We've been conducting pre-election observations since March this year, and up to this point, and we've issued 4 reports on the pre-election period. And we can say that the level of preparation by INEC, by other stakeholders, has been impressive. The people of Ekiti are looking forward to Saturday to cast their vote for a candidate of their choice. The political parties are engaged in campaigns. As you know, campaigns will end 24 hours. So this is the last day of campaigns, and we expect some level of cooperation by different stakeholders to ensuring a successful, peaceful elections. But there have been some concerns that YIAGA Africa has raised in our report. There have been incidents of attacks and violence targeted at either supporters or candidates. We've also seen some level of heightened tension and reprisal attacks involving the Road and Transport Employers Association. We've seen a fracas that has led to 1 fatality. We've also seen incidents where there have been scores of injuries sustained in the build-up to the election. So to a large extent, the tempo and the stake is very high. And we've raised those concerns. A few days ago, we're conducting an outreach in one of the communities here in Ekiti, and in Ado-Ejigbo ward, to be specific, that has 18 polling units. The residents of that community expressed concerns that there are thugs who have historically prevented them and intimidated them from voting. And we've drawn the attention of the security agencies and INEC to this, hoping that with the 17,000 police officers that were deployed to this election, that there will be adequate security of voters, INEC, election observers, and everyone involved in the election to ensure that this election is violence-free.
So let's look at the issue of new polling units in Ekiti ahead of this election. Do you think, looking at the time frame between the announcement of the new polling units to the election, do you think it's well planned by the Electoral Commission?
Yeah, in our earlier reports, we did issue a statement highlighting first the new polling units and the distribution. The threshold set by INEC for number of voters allotted to polling units is about 750. So it's 750 voters per polling unit. But what we have is cases where there are polling units that have over the threshold. So about 71 polling units have polling voters more than 750. 11 out of the 2,445 polling units for Ekiti, have about 2,000 registered voters, and then 1 polling unit has about 3,400 registered voters. Now, that situation, if not managed, could lead to overcrowding of polling stations. And the purpose for creating new polling stations is to decongest the polling stations and facilitate access. Now, if you have polling stations that have higher number of voters, it defeats the purpose of the new polling units that were created. There are some polling units that also have just 8 voters allotted or 1 voter allotted. That we consider also problematic, and INEC needs to ensure that voters are redistributed to polling stations to create a balance, so you don't have congestion at the polling stations on election day, and then you have issues with crowd management, and that's, further create more tension, within those polling units. So it's a problem, but the rationale, the philosophy behind creating additional polling units is apt, is justifiable, and it's the appropriate action that the Electoral Commission should take given the number of voters we have to polling units. However, this particular exercise that INEC conducted has left some gaps, and those gaps need to be addressed.
So let's look at voters' inducements ahead of the election. We've seen an aid different, almost all of these political parties distributing money just to get votes to induce. We even saw a chieftain of the All Progressive Congress publicly announcing to people, vote for our party and get money. Do you think the Electoral Commission and the civil society can really do something to demonetize the voting system, the political system in Nigeria?
First, the fact that a party chieftain can make that public declaration that voters should vote, and if they don't vote, they would not see any money, just reaffirms the level of impunity and crass impunity that has been institutionalized within the Nigerian polity. It is unacceptable and should be condemned, because the more influx of money into our elections, the more commercialization, the more we end up with leaders who are not accountable to the people, the more we end up with leaders who are incompetent, who don't have the moral capital to provide, leadership that our society needs. So it's dangerous for our electoral process. Nigerians, and I start with democratic institutions, INEC has been in collaboration with EFCC and the ICPC. Now that political actors have publicly declared to voters that if they don't vote for them, they would not see any money, what I expect on Saturday is to see the EFCC and the ICPC and the security agencies go after, party agents or go after mercenaries who are buying votes on election day. The polling stations cannot be converted into marketplaces. It is unacceptable, so we expect to see more arrest of people, regardless of their political affiliation on Saturday. The second is INEC also has a role to play in the design of the polling units in a way that it protects the secrecy of the ballot. The ad hoc officials, the presiding officers must insist that voters must vote in the cubicle, and the way they place the cubicle should be such that it does not compromise the secrecy of the ballot. I think that security agencies also have a role to play, and as YIAGA Africa and other civil society organizations have been promoting the education of voters and urging them not to sell their votes, because if you end up commercializing the vote and selling your vote on election day, what you probably have is a leadership that was procured and purchased, and not one that enjoys the legitimacy and the popularity of the people. And if you don't, then what's the whole essence of elections in the first place? If you compromise the choice that people make by weaponizing poverty and procuring their votes. So our major concern for this election is actually vote buying. And it's based on the rhetoric from key political actors. And I think INEC and security agencies have a fundamental and critical role to play, because they bear the burden, of ensuring that this does not happen on Saturday.
Still on the voters' inducement, previous election we've seen lesser cases of security agencies arresting vote buyers and vote sellers. Do you think this will be any different?
I'm cautiously optimistic. We've received commitment from the IG of police who was at the stakeholders meeting. This afternoon we met with the DIG, who is in charge of the police operations here for this election. They have expressed commitment to ensure that there is no form of vote buying on election day. We'll keep our fingers crossed. We'll be watching, but I'll be cautiously optimistic because in previous election, we've received such assurances. But the more assurances we receive, the greater the cases of vote buying at elections. And I just hope that on Saturday, our security agencies would rise to the occasion and arrest people who come to the polling station, to buy votes. And the politicians are also smart because their shenanigans go beyond just procuring the votes at the polling station. Voter inducement, started in the pre-election period. As indicated in our report, we've seen cases across all the polling units, across all the political divides, where politicians have used gifts, to entice voters to either campaign for them or to vote for them. We hope that, the EFCC and the ICPC will prevail upon political actors and arrest them for money laundering. We don't expect, I don't expect that on election day. What we'll see is an avalanche of individuals flooding polling stations and buying votes. And they are very innovative and creative about this. Because if you check the entire framework and the pattern of procuring votes, you discover that every time the politicians are devising new ways of procuring the votes. And it's not just one individual. Sometimes the transaction is done meters away from the polling station. So you come and then you cast your vote. And when you cast your vote, there's someone who leads you to a particular place or house where you receive your pay. But I think in INEC's guidelines, it is prohibited for voters to go into the voting cubicle, with their phones, so they don't take phones of how, pictures of how they voted. The INEC needs to insist on that. The security agencies need to also support INEC to insist that voters should not go into the voting cubicles with their phones, and anyone who does so should be prevailed upon or even be arrested. But given the pre-election environment, which shows that this process will be highly commercialized and the polling centers are going to be converted to marketplaces to trade votes, we should be worried, and every stakeholder should be concerned that for an activity that promotes competition of ideas, for an activity that gives citizens the opportunity, to, without any form of intimidation, without any form of compromise, exercise a fundamental right to choose their leader. I expect to see more, transparency and accountability in the management of this process.
So let's look ahead to 2023 general election. There has been various calls by CSOs for INEC to extend the deadline of the continuous voters registration. Are you also key into this call?
Well, YIAGA Africa in the last, over the last 3-4 weeks, we're amongst the organizations that called for an extension of the CVR because we've been monitoring the continuous voter registration. We've been mobilizing citizens to participate in the CVR exercise across the country. And we came to a point where we clearly saw the need for INEC to extend the CVR. And so from a YIAGA Africa perspective, we strongly call on INEC to extend the CVR by 3 weeks to give members of the public the opportunity to get registered. If INEC extends the CVR, it doesn't infringe on the provisions of the Electoral Act. Section 9 sub 6 of the Electoral Act is very clear that the update, the revision of continuous voter registration shall not end shall end not later than 90 days to the date of an election. So even if the commission extends by 3 weeks, it will still have the opportunity to perform all the business processes that it needs to perform, from data consolidation to clean up, which is called AFIS, then to the production of the PVCs and then the distribution. INEC will still be in a better place before the 2023 election. So we urge INEC to extend the CVR by 3 weeks. If it does so, it will give Nigerians the opportunity, to register and cast their vote. But I think it's also important for the Nigerian public to note that anyone who is registered, if you want to transfer your registration details, if you want to apply for lost or damaged PVCs, you don't need to show up at the INEC office. The online portal provides you an opportunity to do that. So you don't need to flood to INEC offices. Leave INEC offices for people who are fresh registrants, who didn't conduct the pre-registration online. And so if you've not registered before, go to the INEC office. So we don't flood, the INEC offices like we have seen across the country. But we manage, and utilize the online platform which INEC has availed members of the public.
So what's your final word for Ekiti electorate and voters in general ahead of the Saturday election?
The first message to the people of Ekiti and the over 900,000 registered voters who will be voting in 2,445 polling stations across the 177 registration areas is, as you go to the poll, you have a choice to make. It's a choice to elect a leadership that would fix your economic challenges, that will fix the insecurity, that will create jobs. You've got an opportunity to elect that leadership. Do not sell it for anything, because if you do so, then you would have lost the opportunity to get a leader or elect a leader that will fix those challenges that you have. It is better to vote based on your conscience and issues than to sell your vote, because what you do is you're going to suffer for the next 4 or 8 years. So do not sell your vote. Don't even allow people compromise your values by telling you to vote your conscience, to collect their money and then vote your conscience. I don't think it's the proper thing to do. Reject the money and go and vote for a leader or a party that would represent you effectively and provide you, with the promise of democracy. The second is our security agencies need to ensure that they are non-partisan and they are accountable and transparent in the management of election security operations. That is a high level of professionalism and neutrality that we expect on the part of our security agencies. That the same way the police, manage the Anambra elections, we call on them, to repeat same here in Ekiti. And to also ask INEC, it's done so much to prepare for this election. It should be transparent, with the management of the results process. We expect that voting will commence, at 8:30 on election day. That we would not record late commencement due to logistical challenges or BVAS malfunctioning. Our expectation is that these perennial challenges that we experienced in previous elections that have undermined public confidence in the electoral process will not be a feature in this election. It is possible, and whatever it takes as an organization and as a member of a civil society cohort, we will be here to observe and to provide oversight on this process, but to also tell the Ekiti people and also stakeholders that if you don't accept the outcome of the election, there is no need to take into violence. Follow, the laid down legal and civil procedure for the resolution of election disputes. And if anyone out there has any concerns, that the election will be rigged, that results will be falsified, rest assured that with YIAGA Africa's PVT, as well as our election results dashboard, which we are launching at this election, if there is any fraud, we will definitely expose it. And our observation methodology has the capacity to detect fraud whenever it occurs.
Thank you very much for your time. We hope to speak with you again after the election.
Thank you very much, Topi. Thank you.